Hi! Welcome back, Fantasy Fiction Fanatics. It's great to see you again, and I hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be doing another writing lesson, and today we're going to be focusing on characters, which I feel like is the next progression for us to go on, because we've already done setting and we've done plot, and now we're doing characters, because the main aspects of a story is you have to have somewhere for it to take place in. You need something to happen in that place, and you need someone or some people that these things happen to. So characters will be the next thing that we will go ahead and discuss. And like we said, the importance of characters is that without any characters, there's nothing that can happen. We can't create a plot from a void space without anybody or anything for it to happen to. So characters really are one of the most important things in a story, just like plot and setting are. So today is just going to be an overview. It's not going to be anything too in-depth on specific topics that deal with characters, so we'll be able to go more in depth in later videos and things like that. But today I just wanted to do a main overview of the importance of characters, what kind of things to keep in mind when we talk about characters, what kind of things are going to be important. I will go into depth a little tiny bit, like when we break it down between, different kinds of characters, like main characters and secondary characters and things like that. But other than that, today's mostly going to be an overview. So it might not be quite as long as a class. I'm not sure yet. I have all my notes as normal, and we're just going to see how long it takes us to cover the material that I'd like us to get through today. Okay, so let me double check what we should do first. I think we should go ahead and discuss the most basic of things when it comes to character. And that's going to be a flat character versus a round character. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard these kind of phrases if you've taken any kind of creative writing classes. If you have not, I'll go ahead and explain what each type is. A flat character is a character that basically they're a boring character. They don't really have any motivations. They don't have a lot of depth to them. They're basically what you see is what you get. They are just a flat surface. That's why they're called flat characters. They basically have one dimension to them. They have one aspect about them. There's nothing that stands out. There's nothing that you can look into their soul and see what kind of person they are. None of that. They're just pretty much the one aspect that you see in the story, and that's it. The one motivation or the one reason that they're like anything, or sometimes they don't even have any reasons why they're like that or any motivations. They're just there. They're just people that you're like, oh, that's the excitable person. And you don't know anything else about them, that kind of thing. So flat characters are one and done. Round characters are characters that have a lot of depth to them. There's a lot of emotions, there's a lot of reasonings, there's a lot of motivations, there's a lot of background. We really see inside the character's soul, and we see that they're conflicted, or that they have these issues, or their life isn't perfect, or they act this way and then they act this way and they act this way, and you don't know what they're doing because they're such a complicated person and they're all over the place. So like, for example, someone that we could say that's a round person, if you're following us from the Dragonlance series, is we've got Razlan. He's a very round character because he has so much depth to him and so many layers, and every single time we see something about him, we still have more questions and we still don't understand him, and that's why he's such a round character. It's because he has so many facets of himself, so many things that are going on with his character, so many details, so many new things that you'll learn, so many things that you don't understand because there's more to him than what you can see on the page, and that is what makes him such an interesting character. Let's think of a good example of a flat character from Dragonlance. Let me think. A flat character could be like, oh my gosh, what's her name? The dragon that was guarding the children in the first one. For some reason I have like a blank. I think it's Mayflower was her name. That's like a flat character. She's barely in there, and basically all we know is that her children died, And so she has these other children that she is guarding as this dragon, and then she wants to protect these children. So that's basically like a flat character, because yes, we do have a little bit of motivation, but we don't really understand the dragon very well. I mean, we know that the children loved her, but that's it. And she's barely in it at all. So it's kind of makes it seem like, oh yeah, you don't really know that much at all. Same thing with the other dragon that we had, the one that the High Lord rode. I can't think of his name either. I think it started with a B. Man, I'm really bad. I've read these books how many times, and I still don't remember all the characters' names. But anyway, you know that one that had like cestin that he was going to eat? That dragon was basically, I mean, we had a couple motivations. He kind of was against his master, his High Lord that was supposed to be in charge of him, and he kind of went against him a little bit, but we don't really know much. Like, the dragon just kind of was angry and wanted to kind of be devotional to his Dark Queen, and that's about it. That's all we really know, is that he's kind of got his own agenda going and that he's a dragon. So we don't really see what kind of a character those dragons were. They're just in there enough, and we get enough of a personality just to get us by for what their purpose is in the story. Okay, so usually flat characters, like we're kind of already explaining with the examples, flat characters are usually secondary characters, but sometimes not even secondary characters. They're even lower than that. They're just like the background characters, or the characters that are in there for 5 seconds, or the peddler you meet on the street, or whatever else that you could have. They're like the background characters that the characters interact with possibly, or that they have as a filler, or as like, because normal places have people other than our main characters in them, but they aren't characters that we know enough about to get any dimension from them. They just kind of fill one purpose, and that's why they're flat characters, is because the whole reason for their existence is to have that one thing. We don't have a lot of depth to their soul or anything like that. It's just that one point. That does not mean that those kind of characters do not have more depth to their soul, and you can't have it where like your main character comes in and runs in with this other character for 5 minutes, like they have a 5-minute conversation, and they have a really profound conversation that then changes your main character's whole point of view and their whole life and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not saying that the only purpose of these background characters are to be flat characters. I'm just saying that flat characters, if you have them in a story, are usually just the background characters. Just the ones that are in there momentarily, are in there for a split second, that they don't really contribute to the story as a whole for anything more than either guiding your main character or main characters on their way, or as a quick pit stop, or as a passing comment that then means something or whatever. It's not like they are truly developed and important characters to our story, which is usually why they are flat characters, because they are not needed to be in depth and important and have a whole bunch of knowledge and stuff like that. So that's usually where our flat characters lie. Our round characters are usually, well, not usually, are always, main characters are always round characters. Secondary characters, or ones that are also main characters, like if you have kind of like in Dragonlance, where you have a lot of main characters, the whole entire group is kind of a main character, especially how we jump around from viewpoint to viewpoint to viewpoint, is basically, they're all round characters. So secondary characters are also usually round characters, because they are usually in there with enough substance and enough time and enough of importance that they are going to be important to our main characters, and that they are going to guide and help and foster our main characters. And so for it to be, even though they're a secondary character and they're not the main character, they usually need to be round characters. They might not be quite as round, or not quite as fleshed out as your main character or characters are, because that they are secondary characters. They might not need quite so much depth. They might not need quite as much thought and detailed as your main characters are, but they do need to have enough substance for them to be able to help and to guide and to be enough for the main character to get something from these secondary characters, and for the secondary characters to be in there long enough to make a difference to the storyline and to these characters. I feel like I kind of talked myself around in circles over and over again on that subject. But it's really, really important to understand why secondary characters need to be just as round, or not quite as round, but enough to need to be round characters and have a lot of substance to them as well as the main characters. So let me know down below if you have any other questions on the difference between flat characters and round characters, what kind of characters they should be, that kind of stuff. Really quick before we change topics on that, one more thing about round characters is we also need to have, if you're going to have an antagonist that is a character, because sometimes antagonists are not, but a lot of times they are. If you're going to have an antagonist, you really should consider making them a round character. I'm pretty sure that there's probably somewhere out there where somebody has made it where they don't need to be quite as fleshed out or something like that, and they've still done a great job. But everything that I know about antagonists and everything that makes antagonists, in my opinion, worth reading about and worth having the effort of going through them when they're a person and not a thing or an objective, is because they're round characters and they've got motivations and they've got depth and there's a reason behind what they're doing that is opposing our main character. So keep in mind that antagonists are also important to keep in mind when we're talking about characters, because antagonists are just as important to the story as the main character and the secondary characters that help go through the story. Okay, I think that's all I needed on that set of topics. Let's go ahead and move on. Again, any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave them down below for me, and I would be happy to address them. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do an overview about developing a main character. The first thing in mind is to consider, once you have your plot and your setting, but especially the plot, then you have to consider what kind of main character do you need to complete the kind of plot that you've got going. What kind of character or characters is required for you to get what you want done? What kind of story is it going to be? And who is the best, or who are the best people to get you from where your character or story or whatever else is at to where you want it to go and where you want it to end? That's really, really important, because you don't want to have a character or characters that's going to be unconducive to what you wanted to do with the story. That does not mean that they have to not be the opposite of what kind of character it should be. There are times where you are going to want a character who is one way and will be changed to be the way that you need them to be in order to be the right character for that end result. So it doesn't mean they have to be the right person at the start, but you have to decide what kind of story are you creating and what kind of character do you need to get there. Obviously, every character goes through some kind of transformation through a story. They go from point A to point B. They grow in some way, they change in some way, something happens to them, whatever, or even just that they grow in the fact that you don't know all the details, and then suddenly now you know all the details at the end, and so you've seen as a reader the growth, and so that's as a writer, as for you to just assess how they should change. But it is important to know what change you want to do, what kind of things you want done, so you can decide what kind of character you want to have as your main character and how that main character is going to get from point A to point B in order to do your plot. What is the best one for you? The best one for this story? What do you feel like the story needs in order for the plot and everything to continue and to progress the way you want it to, and that's going to capture readers? So that is the first thing you have to consider, and you have to decide what it is that you want for this role. That's the most important thing, is to decide what kind of character, why they're the person that's going to be doing it. For example, if we're going to take Dragonlance as our example here, is that the end point here is going to be defeat the Queen of Darkness, the goddess of evil, has come to Earth, and we have this group of people who through their journey is going to end up defeating this evil. I know you might be thinking like, oh, is that spoiler alert? No, I'm sure you guys can tell that that's the main goal already, since we're already halfway through book 2. So Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman had to decide what group of characters, what kind of personalities, what kind of people do we need in order for this Queen of Darkness to be defeated by going through these different things. What kind of character or what kind of characters do you need in order to get to that plot ending? What kind of personality, what makes them the best qualified to do this? Is it their personality? Is it their skill set? Is it both? Is it neither? You have to decide what kind of character would be best. Not saying that they can't change, like what we had mentioned, in order to get to a better spot, but who is going to be the best one to start this journey and to be able to end up whether they already are or whatever growth they need to go through in order to get to that end? What makes them the right character? So that's the first thing you need to do when developing a main character. Then you have to be, how has the character gotten to the start of your story? So basically you have to make up a backstory. You have to decide how they became the person that they are, and that is a big part of making a round character. You have to decide what kind of in-depth soul do they have that your character needs to get to your plot. How do they get to where they are? How do they get to their motivations? How are they going to decide to go on this journey or be forced on this journey, or how are they going to be this character unless you have them have a way that they got to where they're at? So first you have to decide how they're going to be, and then you have to decide how it is, or whatever background information that you're going to have and require in order for them to be at this starting point that's going to make it so they can do this journey. Because you can't just say, hey, they're going to be this way and have no reason. That's going to be a flat character. You need a character that's got soul to it, a character that's got reasons, a character that's got feelings and thoughts and opinions and all the other things that come with being a human being in order for them to be a good character that people are going to want to read and to want to know about and to want to see where their journey takes them. You really have to give them a personality that has more than just the one facet. Okay. And then you have to decide how this main character is going to change and grow, or if you're just going to release more information or whatever else in order to complete the plot. So I kind of addressed this at the beginning, but it really is important for you to decide, now that you have the character that you want, now that you know how this character got to where they're at, you have to decide what kind of things does this character need to go through in order to change, in order to grow, in order to understand, in order to anything from point A to point B in order to get to that point B. What kind of things do they have to go through in order to become what the tool that you need to complete your plot? For example, it could be that they're a really conceited person and they can't get past themselves, but they go through a humbling experience, like almost dying, and then they realize, like, hey, I should not be this kind of person when this other person saved me, and then it's like an aha moment. Not saying that it all has to be an aha moment. It could just be that they learn new things. It could be that they, like I said, require knowledge. It could be that they realize something about themselves that they didn't know that they had to begin with. Like, for example, the lack of confidence. Maybe they don't have any confidence. And they go through and they finally realize at the end, I do have this confidence and I can do whatever it is that you wanted them to do, whatever that plot point, story end is. It could be that they do a transformation. It could be that they become a completely different kind of person and they do like a 180 switch. Or it could be that they just are the person that they always needed to be, but the reader didn't realize exactly who they were until this one moment, and there's like an epiphany for the reader about the character, and then finally the character gets it and they get why this is the person for the job, and then we complete whatever that point is. So it can be a lot of different things. It could be pretty much anything you want it to be for this character. It just has to be something where we don't feel like we're still at the beginning when we're supposed to be at the end. This is important for all books, not just single one standalone story. It's even important for long series. For example, we're going to take Harry Potter, and it's a 7-book series. But every single time, through every single book, we see Harry change. Every single time he has to fight Voldemort, or as book 3 where he finds his godfather. Every single story makes him a different person in the end. Every single time he faces some kind of difficulty, or he comes to this point where then he changes and morphs for the next book, and changes and morphs for the next book, and changes and morphs for the next book, until we get to book 7 where then he's finally ready. He's finally at the point that he needs to be for him to make this journey happen, for him to defeat Voldemort, for it to be all worth it. So, just because you have a full series does not mean that they do not need to change in every single book. Now, it doesn't mean that they necessarily have to. Like, for example, for our 3-book story of Dragonlance, because it is all one big long story, even though we do have those breaks, some of the characters change in the first book. Now we're seeing some of the other characters, or some of the same characters, continue to grow and change in the second book. And we will see them continuing to change in the third book. But it doesn't have to be all at once, because the story is an overarching story versus short stories that, yes, do go together, but have their own individual things that kind of wrap things up, if you get what I mean. So instead of having us face, Voldemort every single one, and kind of having it where the whole book, like, it has its own plot, its own main plot, its own fight against evil. We've got our own little mini plot, but it's not a big, huge one. We fought off one bad guy, but it's not like the story really had a big dynamic that then ended and it could stop there. Or, for example, Harry Dresden, one of my favorite series ever. Each book is like its own thing, and it could technically be the end, but then it picks up, and then it could be an end, and then it picks up, and then it could be an end. So each book is like its own separate thing, as well as something that goes together. That kind of thing. So it's really important to understand these 3 things specifically when it comes to main characters, because they are the ones that stand up in front of all of the other characters. They're the ones that are the most important, the most focused on, the most relied upon. Obviously, there's a whole bunch more about developing a main character. It's not just those 3 things, but it is the most important things to start with when you're first creating that main character. And we will definitely talk more about it as we continue on through our lessons and things like that. I will have a video just about main characters in the future and stuff like that. But for this overview, and for really just thinking about how to start with the character, with what the main 3 things are when you are making a main character, and what they need versus what other types of characters need. Those are the main 3 things to focus on. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, problems, anything else when it comes to what I've discussed for these 3 main topics for main characters, go ahead and leave any questions, comments, concerns down below, and I can totally address them. Or if there's anything that you would like when I do make that main character focused video, and you want something very specific to be talked about, go ahead and leave that down in the comments too, and I'll be sure to write that down, so when I get to that video, we can go ahead and talk about whatever it is that you are concerned about or have questions on. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about is secondary characters. Now, for secondary characters, I have 4 things to keep in mind. Some of them are the same as main characters, but to a lesser degree. Some of them are different, just because secondary characters are different from our main characters. So the first thing is that you have to keep in mind for a secondary character, any of them, if they're going to be in there for a good portion of the time, is what kind of character is needed to help the main character do whatever they need to do. So, what kind of character do you need? Like, what kind of personality, or what kind of skill sets, or what kind of knowledge, or what kind of anything else does your main character need that they don't possess in order to help them achieve the plot goal, to get them from point A to point B? That is the whole point of a secondary character, is to help the main character do what that needs to be done. So you have to then assess, once you figure out your main character and decide this is how they're going to be, and this is how they're going to change, and this is what kind of backstory they have, then you need to decide for your secondary characters is what kind of things do they need that they don't have at the start in order to get them from point A to point B. What kind of things and what kind of people need to be included with different kind of skill sets and different kind of things in order to make your main character be able to get there, or to get to the change that will make it so they can get there to the end. What help do they need? What weaknesses do they have that will then need to be improved by having a secondary character? Now, this might seem like a lot because you got a lot of secondary characters, and sometimes that's the case, and sometimes secondary characters pop up without you thinking about all this. But then once you get them in your sights, you then have to decide, okay, is this secondary character important enough to the story? Is this going to be somebody who's really, really helpful and is necessary for a good amount of portion of this time? And then decide, is this the kind of character that you really need in this position? Or do you need to tweak your character, or do you need to change your character in any way in order to be better, helpful, more helpful for your main character? So that's a really, really important question to ask, is what are the weaknesses that the main character has that needs to be strengthened, and what kind of help do they need from a secondary character? And when I mean this secondary characters, I'm meaning something like characters that are in there a good amount of time. So like Harry Potter in the Harry Potter series is that we've got Harry as our main character, and we've got Ron and Hermione. Those are secondary characters, but they're in it, and you could basically, you feel like they're kind of a main character, even though really Harry is the main character. It's from his point of view, it's his journey, and Ron and Hermione are his helpers and his companions in order to get him where he needs to go. So that's the kind of secondary character I'm talking about, are characters that are in the story for a good length of time but are not the main character. So after we've decided what kind of help this main character needs, then you have to go on and deciding how did they get to where they are to help the main character, because they are also round characters for the most part, because they're in there for a good length of time. You have to have some kind of backstory for them. You have to have some kind of motivation and ideas and everything else to make this character round. It doesn't have to be as fleshed out as our main character. The main character needs to be really full, flesh, embodied character. Secondary characters need to, yes, be fleshed out, but they don't have to be quite so extravagant. But it is important if you do. And if you, a lot of times you, as a writer, will know things about characters that are not on the page. So some secondary characters, like Ron and Hermione, if they're going to be that important, you do need to know pretty much all about them, even though they're going to be a secondary character. Not necessarily every single one, depending on how important they are. But you do need to keep in mind, how did this person get where they're at? What are their motivations? What is their reasoning for doing this? Why are they this kind of person? Because secondary characters are so much in the story, just as much as the main character, so you have to have them be flesh full characters that have motivations and thoughts and feelings and actually be important to our readers. So keep in mind that the main character is not the only person that you need to know a lot about. These secondary characters, though not necessarily always have to be the same extent, they do need to be fleshed out, and they do need to be round characters that are really, they've had a life before the pages. They have had experiences and things that have come up in their life that then leads them to be able to help this main character. Okay, Then the next question is one of the most important questions. Like, really, really, really important. I know you're like, well, why are you mentioning this like third if it's so important? But it's not necessarily that it trumps the other questions, because, I mean, they're all important, and I'm not saying that it has to be like what comes first. A lot of times, just knowing what kind of help they need is actually the first thing that's what kind of things that they need to help them is usually actually the first question, because until you decide that, you can't decide this question that I'm about to say. And that is, what is the relationship this character is going to have to the main character that's going to best help them? So yes, it's super, super important to know how they're going to help them and what kind of help the character needs and what kind of character we need as a secondary character. And yes, it's important that they're around character. But what's really, really important is how you set up those values in place. So I'd say first you have to decide what kind of character they're going to be, and what they're going to help with and how they're going to strengthen our main character. And then you have to decide what is the best position, the best relationship that they can have to this main character to get those skills across. Are they going to be, if it's going to be knowledge, then maybe it might be best to do it as a guide character, somebody who's a father or an older brother, or somebody who's more experienced, an older character that's going to be related to them in order to impart their knowledge. That's not the only way to do knowledge, but I'm just giving you like examples that are well-known, ones that are easy right off the bat, because I mean, a lot of times it's something that takes a lot of thought. You can't just decide right off the bat being like, okay, well, this person's this kind of character and this person's this kind of character, so we're just going to throw them here, here, and here. A lot of times, if you want to make it good and creative, a lot of times it will be in a more creative way. It might even be a younger person for knowledge that's far beyond their years. And they actually, your main character will notice, hey, I've got a lot to learn compared to this person that's done this and this and this, had this hardships in their life. So, like I said, the example is not the only example. I'm just trying to give you some examples that are easy off the top of my head kind of things. If they are like a warrior skill set or whatever, somebody who is gonna be protecting your person's back, it might be a best friend or a sibling, or it might be somebody that they meet along the way that they find is really important. You know, it could be lots of different types of things, and you have to decide which relationship is going to be best to help them and how long that relationship is going to be able to last in your story. So say you have that knowledge character that's a father figure, but then he has to go on this journey and the father is going to be staying at home because the father can't make this journey or whatever, or a grandfather or whatever. That's not going to be the best person to put it in if you need them to impart knowledge through the journey. In that case, then it doesn't work at all. So it's really important to decide what kind of knowledge or what kind of skills and things that they are weak on and what things that they need help on. And then you have to be really assertive and notice what kind of placement that character will be best in order to help the character along as they go through their journey from point A to point B. Okay, and then the last one that you'll have to consider as main topics is going to be, how does this secondary character change or evolve in order to continue helping this character? Not all secondary characters change and evolve, but a lot of them, like we're going to continue using our example of Ron and Hermione, when they're in the story pretty much as long as the main character, they're going to go through some change because they're going on this journey and they're going through difficult times and they're going through obstacles and everything like that at the same time as your main character. So you can't really have a main character that has all these changes and all this stuff that they're going through and then not have the people around them in the same situations not changing. And a lot of times the changes that the secondary characters make enable them to help the main character even more. It's kind of like a level up, I guess you could say, is sidekick point 2, where it doesn't have to be a change like a main character, where it could be a change from something to completely something else. It could just be that, hey, this character, secondary character, has gone from this level of knowledge to this level of knowledge, or this level of skill to this level of skill, and that is what is important and is needed for this main character to have. So it could be a change just like that, or it could be a change personality-wise, and that secondary character changing might end up being what triggers the main character to change, or any number of things. It's really up to the author to decide. But these are the important things that you have to think of and decide on as you're going through this process and writing and thinking up these characters and deciding what is best to make your story happen, what is best for your main character, what is best to make the plot happen, what is best for the reader, what's going to be the twist that makes people interested in reading, those kind of things. It's important when you're making these characters to consider every aspect, and sometimes you're going to love a character, but you're going to realize that they're all wrong, and you'll have to dump them out and start over with somebody new with a different personality or different assets or whatever else. Whew. Okay, the last thing I wanted to go over is antagonists. And let's see, it looks like I've got 4 topics, 4 little things to go over for antagonists as our broad view. Okay. So antagonists are different, but they are also round. So that's the main thing, is that you also need to have a round antagonist, because without a round antagonist, which I know I mentioned this earlier, without a round antagonist, nobody's going to care about the villain. No one's going to be like, what was the point of it? Everyone's going to just be like, well, what's the point in the end? This person means nothing. This person doesn't make sense. Why would the heck would they do that? What does it matter? Like that kind of stuff. It's really important that even if it doesn't end up on the page, that these characters as antagonists are just as thought out and just as thought through and have so much of a soul and a mind as our main character. Because it's basically like, I guess you could say that a protagonist and an antagonist, they're kind of like equal opposites ends. We've got the main character, and yes, technically the main character is who you see and who you follow through, and you have the whole journey with them, and they are much more important to the reader, obviously. But the antagonist needs the same kind of intensity, because we don't go through any journeys with them, we don't know everything about them, we don't have the time to study them like we do these main characters. So you really need to make sure that the antagonist is somebody worth going against. Because that's the whole point, is that the main character is against whatever is blocking them, the antagonists. The whole point that they can't get from A to B, or the whole point that they're going from A to B, is because of the antagonist. So, the antagonist has to be worth fighting for. Or fighting, not for, fighting against. Has to be worth going up against. Whatever character or entity or thing or whatever has to be just as important and just as seen by the reader, that makes it think, yes, this is worth fighting against. Or in a case where, like Dragonlance, where it's good versus evil, you see the terribleness of the evil, so the good has to be worth fighting for to go against the evil. So it's really, really, really important to flesh out all enemies, especially the main antagonist, just as much as you give to the main character and the secondary characters. It's so, so important. Okay, so then you have to decide, like everything else, what kind of antagonist are you going to have? Are you going to have, well, there's 2 different kinds when we're going to talk about this, but what kind of obstacle or end goal are you going to have? That's the 2 kinds. We've got an antagonist this is the goal we're searching for. Like with Dragonlance or with Harry Potter. It's all about fighting the bad guy. Getting to the end so you can end the evil. That's the kind of antagonist that comes to mean this is the end goal for our character. This is what our character is fighting for or against. That's that kind of antagonist. The main evil, the main obstacle is how we're shooting to get there and to finally bash it out of the way, and that's our end. So you have to decide, is that the kind of antagonist that you want that fits your plot? What is your plot going to be? What kind of antagonist is best fitted for that? Other one is opposing or something that creates obstacles. So we've got an antagonist that continually puts problems in our character's way in order to stop them from getting their goal. So your protagonist has a goal, And your antagonist is somebody who's trying to stop that goal, trying to make it so that way it's not going to happen. For example, I talked about Wolf in my last character analysis from the 10th Kingdom. The 10th Kingdom is that the whole point of the story is for Virginia and her father to get back home, because once they've gone through that mirror, their goals are to make it home to New York. And then we've got this evil witch, or queen that's taking over, trying to take over all the 9 kingdoms. And because of this lady, of this evil queen, it's not that she is the end goal, it's to get rid of her. The end goal is to get home. And because of her trying to take over the 9 kingdoms, and because of things that she has put in place, it is stopping our characters from moving forward and getting back to New York. Sure, some of it also happens because of other misfortunes and stuff like that, and they just end up with obstacles in the way. But that's just how stories work, is that things just don't always work out. But a lot of times it's because of her as an antagonist, her putting things into motion that is now stopping their goal from getting home, because of the antagonists getting things in their way. Let me see if I can think of another one. That one is a bit more hard to think of examples of for fantasy. Because fantasy a lot of times is a good versus evil kind of thing. Even though we do now with urban fantasies have a lot more of a different dynamics with urban fantasies since they live in the real world. But something that I can think of that's just like a basic, quick off the top of my head example that's not fantasy related is like in romance, like a romance story. You've got the main character who's trying to get with the cute guy. And then you've got the evil stepsisters or the evil girl that's at school or whatever else that keeps putting obstacles in their way, trying to get the guy's attention themselves, or, bullying the main character or anything else. Like, they're putting obstacles in the way of getting to their goal, what they want in the end. So that's not a fantasy example, but I'm sure I can think of one. I just haven't been able to think of it right off the top of my head quite as easily since they're not as common. But they do exist, and so I will get back to you and make a comment down below or something like that when I think of one that's a really good obstacle-based fantasy. So yeah, you do have to decide what kind of antagonist are you going to have. It's going to be an end goal or something that creates obstacles. So that is very, very important, and a lot of that comes from whatever kind of plot you're going to have, what you want your story to be. That's what's going to best enable you to pick what kind of antagonist fits that plot. Okay, the third thing is, why is the antagonist against the main character? That's a really, really important question. Why is this antagonist doing what he's doing? And this is also part about being a round character, is why are they opposed? What makes this person against what the other person wants, or what makes them the end goal against the main character? So like with Dragonlance, why does the evil Queen of Darkness against these characters? She's against the characters because they want to kill her, well, not kill her, but just send her back to off the mortal plane, because she's trying to kill everybody, including them, and she wants to kill them because they're against her. So you really have to consider the motivation that the antagonist has and what the point of what they're doing is, and why it goes against the main character and what they're trying to do. Because since they're at both ends and opposite or whatever, you really have to think of what the tension is going to be between them, and you have to make it so that way they're both equally against each other. You can't have it where like, oh, well, this is their goal, and they're like, oh, well, they're kind of in the way, but not really. Like, that doesn't work. It has to be a direct opposite, and it has to be a reason why they're opposed. Their own antagonist has to have some own goal or something else like that that goes against the main character. It has to be really clear about why this person or entity is against our main character, because that's the only way we can have the correct proportions, the correct dynamics, in order to have it be against the character and to be either the obstacles or the end goal. Did that make sense? I feel like in my head it made sense. I don't know if I got it out in the way that it makes sense. Please comment down below if you have any questions about that portion. Well, any portion really, but especially that portion, because I don't feel like I explained it well. Okay, and then the last one is going to be what leads the character to be in the point where they are to be the antagonist. So again, all of your characters that are going to be round, that aren't going to be the 2 seconds just thrown in there because they need, to buy bread or something. Anything that's going to be more than just a quick something that our characters need to have a backstory and a reason why. So again, it's about creating a round character. Somebody that has meaning and depth and perception and thoughts and feelings and reasons and motivations and everything else that comes with creating a real life human being. So you have to make them real, because it's important for them to be worth fighting, as we talked about before. So you have to then create a backstory, a reason that they are how they are, and that they want what they want, and that they're against the main character because of this reason, and that they're either going to be the end all or opposing because of this. All of that combined will make up our antagonist. So it's very, very important to keep in mind all of those different things, and especially make them a round character. A character that we care about defeating. A character that doesn't seem like we should just blow them off. Somebody that actually is important to go against. Whew. Okay, I feel like we did a pretty good overall discussion on our characters. It's just, like I said, a main overview. It's nothing too in-depth, nothing too nitpicky. Of course, I will have more content with actual videos focusing just on main characters and more ideas about how you should go about actually creating one other than the main questions that we talked about, because obviously when you create characters, it's a lot more in depth than just considering those few questions. Same thing with secondaries. I'm sure that I can have a nice video just explaining different kinds of secondary characters and their placements and what kind of things that are important for when you're placing them and all those other things that I talked about, as well as antagonists and creating good, evil characters that you will then even have your readers rooting for, and those main characters that those antagonists that readers just love to hate, people that you just despise and enjoy despising them and enjoy as much bringing them down as the main character does. So again, just an overview. Let me know, again, if there's anything in more in-depth videos that you would like me to cover on this topic, as well as any questions that you have about what I covered today. I would be more than happy to have a discussion with you. If there's any ideas that you have for yourself about what I covered and you'd like to have a discussion with me about it, I would love to know and hear all the things that you have to say down below. Just a last little quick comment. Sorry my video was so dark today. I started a little bit later than I'd hoped to, and it gets really dark here about 4 o'clock. It was already, the sun was pretty much setting, and I was losing my light. So I'm sorry that it's a little bit of a darker video this time. I need to make sure I get started a little bit earlier on my next one. So I hope the visual isn't too bad. I hope you have a great night, and I'll see you next time. Hope you enjoyed the class. Bye.